A soldier's battle at home, saving his daughter from cruel control. The old, rusty iron door on the 5th floor creaked with a familiar sound that John hadn't heard in years. A scream pierced the air. The voice was young, choked, broken, stabbing into his ears like needles. Don't, Mommy, it hurts." John froze. His heart turned to stone. His breath caught in his throat. Without hesitation, he pushed the door open. The apartment was bathed in soft golden light, so tidy it felt soulless. The living room walls were covered with family photos. Rose in a floral dress, smiling brightly. Stella in a white dress, her hair tied with a red ribbon. Carefully arranged frames by the gleaming piano. But none of those photos had him in them. Not a single one. He quickly walked down the hallway to the music room. The door was slightly ajar. A dry, sharp sound of a ruler striking echoed inside. "Play it again. Wrong. Do you know how much money I've invested in you?" Stella was kneeling on the floor, her hands on the piano keys, eyes swollen and red, her face pale, hair sweaty and messy. One of her little hands clutched her other. Wrist, red marks visible on the skin. Rose stood there, a ruler in her hand, her eyes cold. "Stella," John said hoarsely. Rose turned around, startled, but her expression shifted from surprise to calm in an instant. She set the ruler on the table, smoothed her sideburns, and gave a faint smile. "John, you're back. Why didn't you call first?" John stepped closer, his gaze falling on Stella's tear-streaked cheeks. The little girl lowered her head. Trembling, lips pressed tight as if she feared even his presence. He clenched his fists, veins pulsing at his temples as if about to burst. But in front of him stood Rose, his ex-wife, with her flawless, perfect appearance. "You thought I didn't have the right to come into this house anymore," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. Rose shrugged, picking up a coat draped over a chair. "Don't say that. After all, you're her father." "But how many years have you been gone? 5? 6? Stella shivered. She was still kneeling by the piano, her eyes fixed on the floor as if trying to avoid every gaze. John swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the room. A large photo on the wall showed Rose and Stella standing in front of Juilliard School, another of them strolling down a city street. No trace of him anywhere. No memory of him left. Rose crossed her arms, speaking as if reading his thoughts. "I had to rearrange everything. I didn't want her living in the past, suffering, traumatized. You understand, right?" John gave a bitter laugh, every word striking like a blow to his mind. "By making her kneel to practice piano, by erasing every memory of her biological father? That's your idea of building a future?" Rose sighed, stroking Stella's hair. "You don't understand. She's as weak as you are. If she isn't trained, she'd never become anything." John was about to argue when the doorbell rang. An elderly man with graying hair, thin and frail Mr. Edward, the downstairs neighbor, appeared. "Sounded noisy. Everything okay?" Edward asked, glancing at Stella before looking at John. Rose quickly smiled. "It's fine, Mr. Edward. She's just practicing piano." The old man frowned, casting John a pointed look, whispering, "Heard her crying all night. Same yesterday. You should keep an eye on her." Rose cut him off, her voice sweet but laced with menace. "Please mind your own business. This is my apartment, my child, and I know how to teach her." John clenched, his fists tighter, his eyes locking on Rose. "Right, and I'll teach too. But first, I need to know what my daughter has been going through." Rose smirked, then turned, pulling Stella to her feet. "Go wash your face. Get ready for dinner. You don't want Daddy to see you looking like this, do you?" Stella whispered softly, "Yes, Mommy." John called out gently, "Stella." The girl glanced at him for a brief moment, her eyes empty, cold, as if he were a stranger. Rose put an arm around her shoulders, emphasizing each word. "Daddy just got back. Don't disappoint him, darling." Stella lowered her head, walking away like a shadow. The door closed, leaving John standing alone in a house full of photos without him, full of sheet music that no longer held the soul of its composer. He clenched his fist silently, making a promise. He had lost too much on the battlefields of Afghanistan. But this time, he wouldn't lose his daughter. Scene. 3 days later, the apartment, night. The piano sounded, each dry note echoing in the silent room. John sat on the cold sofa, staring at the wall clock. Each ticking second felt like the stroke of an invisible sentence. He had stayed in the apartment for 3 days, 3 silent days of observation. 3 days of realizing just how much Stella's life had been taken away from him. The schedule taped all over Stella's room stunned him. Large sheets of paper listed every hour. 5 hours of piano practice daily, even on Sundays. No playtime, no friends, nothing but finger techniques, sight reading, ear training. Rose spoke calmly, as if it was all perfectly normal. You know, the National Conservatory only accepts prodigies. She has to surpass herself. John asked, by locking her in a room all day, by forbidding her to be a child. Rose adjusted a stack of papers, her eyes sharp. You don't understand. This is called Tiger Mom discipline. Every piano prodigy is trained this way, John smirked. And when she plays wrong, you starve her? Stop her from bathing? That's Tiger Mom discipline too, huh? Rose crossed her arms. Do you have proof, or are you just here after disappearing for years, pretending to be some hero? The words stabbed John like a knife to the chest. He had been a soldier, believing he fought on the battlefield to protect his family, to be their anchor. But coming back, everything had changed. He no longer had a place in his own home. That night, he sat in the living room staring at the piano, the only thing left from his late mother, Stella's grandmother. The instrument was no longer a musical companion. It had been turned into a weapon of punishment, a twisted symbol of control. Stella stepped out of her room, looking frail, her eyes sunken. John called softly, "Sweetheart, come here to Daddy for a moment." The little girl hesitated, glancing back. Rose was watching her every move. John spoke gently, "It's okay. Daddy just wants to talk." Stella cautiously approached, sitting across from him, her small hands trembling. John tried to smile. "Do you like playing the piano?" Stella lowered her eyes, whispering, "I'm not allowed to say. I have to practice." Mommy said, "If I'm not good, I'll disappoint her." John held her hand, feeling her fragile skin, the faint red marks on her wrists. He squeezed it gently. "I know, but you don't have to hide anything from Daddy. Do you remember? Your grandma?" Stella looked confused, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mommy said I'm not allowed to. Daddy shouldn't talk about her either." John went silent, heartbroken. His late mother, Elena, had been a talented, gentle pianist. She had taught Stella her very first songs before dying in a car accident. And now, even that memory had been buried by Rose. Footsteps approached. Rose appeared, wearing a light robe, a faint smile on her lips. "What are you teaching her? More of your sentimental nonsense." John tightened his grip on his fist. "I'm reminding her that she has the right to remember where she came from." Rose gave a cold smile. "Remembering doesn't matter. The dead are gone, and the living must move forward." Stella trembled, standing up, whispering, "I'm sorry. I have to practice again." John called after her, "Sweetheart." But Stella had already turned away, her figure like a shadow, quietly disappearing behind the door of the music room. Scene. The next evening, Rose is out. John searches the apartment. When Rose went out, John searched through the few old belongings that remained. In the drawer under Stella's bed, he found an old notebook, its cover worn, the pages yellowed with age. It was a handwritten collection of music pieces composed by Elena, mixed with Stella's childish handwriting. Grandma's song, "Today I Practiced." Grandma will be proud. John gripped the notebook tightly, his heart twisting in pain. He carefully wrapped it up, planning to give it to Stella the next day, so she would know that the memory of her grandmother had not disappeared. But when he stepped into the living room, he froze. Rose was standing in front of the fireplace, her eyes burning with hatred. In her hand was the very notebook he had just held. "Where did you find this?" Rose asked, her voice slithering like a snake through clenched teeth. John stepped forward. "Don't. Give it back to me." But it was too late. Rose threw the notebook into the fireplace, and the flames roared, devouring every page, every memory. "This child is as weak as your family," Rose said coldly. "I'll teach her to be strong. No feelings, no past." John lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Are you insane? That was my mother's." Rose jerked his hand away, her eyes filled with contempt. "You don't live here. You abandoned us. Don't play the hero now." Stella stood in the corner, her eyes wide, witnessing everything. But she only turned away, walking back toward the music room, as if she were already too used to memories being burned and dreams being buried. The apartment reeked of charred paper, the sound of off-key music coming from the music room mixed with John's heavy sighs. Scene. Days later, the apartment, tense and suffocating. From that day on, the atmosphere in the apartment became suffocating. John barely saw Stella leave the music room. That small, white-walled space had turned into a real cage where every note, every breath, every sob was locked away. Each morning, Rose would tape a new sheet of music to the music room door with a cold note. "The audition is coming. Memorize this in 2 days." John picked up the paper, staring at the dense notes tangled like a spiderweb, his chest tightening. He had been a soldier, faced with bombs and gunfire, but he had never felt as helpless as he did now. That night, the piano played off-key again and again. John pressed his ear to the door, hearing Stella's trembling voice. I can't remember it." Rose's sharp reply cut through the air. "Can't remember? You want to be punished again?" John banged on the door. "Rose, open the door." Rose laughed coldly from behind it. "Don't make a scene. I'm teaching my daughter." The piano stopped. Stella's sobs broke the silence. Scene. The next morning. John takes action. The next morning, John secretly attached a small recording device under the piano. He knew he needed proof. He needed the truth to save his daughter from this cruel discipline. The reality was worse than he imagined. That night, when he listened to the recording, Rose's venomous voice echoed in his ears. "Shut up. I don't want to be your mother. I carry you like a debt. Stupid." Stella's sobs followed. I'm sorry." The sound of a ruler striking the piano keys cracked through the speakers, chilling John's blood. He clenched the headphones, feeling every vein in his head about to burst. The next morning, Rose brought another sheet of music, her eyes cold as ice. "Play this for the audition. If you don't memorize it, no food, no sleep." Stella turned pale, trembling. I haven't finished learning the last one," Rose sneered. "Do you want to be weak like your father? I don't need a useless kid in this house." John stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. "Enough," Rose smirked. "You have no rights here. Don't interfere with how I raise my child." John held Stella's trembling hand tightly. "I'm her father. I have rights." Rose folded her arms, her eyes challenging. "You left for 6 years. And now you suddenly remember you have the right to be a father?" Stella stood between them, her frail body trembling, her eyes like a caged bird's, no longer knowing what hope was. John turned to her, his voice softening. "You don't have to endure this." But Stella only shook her head, whispering, I can't say that. Mommy said so." Scene. That night. Chaos erupts. That night, the piano echoed again, broken and uneven. Past midnight, John heard something crash to the floor, followed by Rose's furious voice. You're so useless, you don't deserve to eat. John rushed out of his room, slamming the music room door open. Stella was collapsed on the floor, her face pale, lips cracked, her breathing weak. Rose stood there, expressionless. She just fainted. Don't overreact. John scooped Stella into his arms, his voice trembling with fury. She's exhausted. Are you trying to kill her? Rose scoffed. She's too weak anyway. How can she pass the National Conservatory like this? John said nothing more. He stormed out, carrying his daughter to the elevator. Edward, the elderly neighbor from downstairs, spotted them and gasped. What happened? John gritted his teeth. The hospital. She fainted. Edward watched them, his eyes worried. I told you, you have to do something. Scene, the hospital. Emergency room. At the hospital, Stella lay on an emergency bed, her face pale, a thin 4-needle in her small hand. Dr. Wallace, an older man from Philadelphia, stepped out, his face serious. The girl is exhausted, hypoglycemic, severely malnourished. How could anyone make a child train this hard? John clenched his fists. Doctor, I need a medical certificate about her condition. Wallace looked at him, his voice steady. You're her biological father. Do you have documentation? John handed over the papers. Wallace signed the report, shaking his head. I don't want to interfere, but this kind of upbringing, it can kill both a child's body and soul. John nodded, thanking him, his eyes filled with determination. He now had part of the evidence. He would not let Stella be destroyed any further. Scene, back at the apartment. Confrontation. When they returned to the apartment, Rose was standing with her arms crossed at the door, her gaze icy. Taking her to the hospital? What kind of circus act is that? You embarrassed me in front of the building management. John held up the medical certificate in front of her face. I'm taking this to court. Rose gave a mocking smile. You think it's that simple? I have lawyers. I have society on my side. John gripped the paper tightly, his heart burning. We'll see who can protect Stella. Rose turned. Her back, her voice ringing with sarcasm. Good luck, war hero. The apartment door closed, leaving John standing in the hallway, his heart heavy. But he knew this time he would not back down. Scene. The courtroom, a freezing winter morning. Court session took place on a freezing winter morning. John sat in the plaintiff's seat, clutching the file tightly, his eyes fixed on Stella, sitting curled up beside Rose, her face pale, her eyes drained of life. Judge Anderson, a middle-aged man from New York, known for his strictness, presided over the trial, his cold voice echoing through the courtroom. The custody dispute over a minor between Mr. John Carter and Ms. Rose Foster begins. John stood up, his voice firm. I demand custody of my daughter Stella Carter because she is suffering severe emotional abuse. Rose sat across from him, her neatly curled hair and tailored suit giving her a polished, composed look. She smiled faintly, as if everything was just a misunderstanding. Your Honor, I have raised Stella for the past 6 years, ever since her father left. I have never abused her. Rose's lawyer, a tall man with slicked back hair named Matthew O'Connor, rose to speak, his tone precise and authoritative. Your Honor, please consider the evidence of Ms. Rose's positive living environment, family photos, academic certificates, and Stella's music achievement awards. Matthew placed several photos on the table, Stella in a white dress standing beside Rose, another of them on a picnic, and a photo of a clean, tidy bedroom. John looked at the pictures, his chest tightening. He knew they were staged. She hasn't had a real childhood, John countered. She's forced to practice piano 5 hours a day, including weekends. She's under total control, no friends. No mention of her biological grandmother, Isavenko. Aloud, Judge Anderson frowned. Do you have concrete evidence of abuse? John took out the hospital's medical certificate and played a short audio recording of Rosie's voice. I don't want to be your mother. You're a debt I have to carry, Matthew smirked. This recording lacks context. It could easily be edited. Anderson nodded. True, we need clearer evidence. The medical report only states exhaustion, which is not sufficient to prove systemic abuse. John clenched his fists. Rose sat across from him, smiling confidently. Anderson turned to Stella. Child, has your mother ever abused you? Stella lowered her head, clutching the hem of her dress tightly, her lips pressed together. Rose whispered, Say it, darling. Mommy loves you. Stella timidly raised her head, her voice barely a whisper. No, Mommy loves me. John felt his throat close up, his heart being crushed. Matthew quickly added, Your Honor, the child clearly confirms she's not being mistreated. On the contrary, she has achieved outstanding results in children's piano competitions. Anderson wrote notes, his face expressionless. Mr. John, where have you been for the past 6 years? Why haven't you cared for your daughter? John gripped the file tightly. I enlisted. I served in a peacekeeping mission in Afghanistan. I was injured and underwent treatment. When I returned, I found my daughter living like a prisoner in her own home. Matthew countered immediately. But the fact remains that you were absent for years. That's neglect. Now you come back, relying on a few papers and questionable recordings, demanding custody. Your Honor, it's obvious who has provided Stella with a stable environment. John wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He turned to look at Stella. She sat silently, her eyes blank, unable to meet his gaze. Rose leaned close to the girl, whispering just loudly enough for John to hear. If you lie, you won't get dinner, remember. Stella trembled, lowering her head, tears silently dripping onto her dress. Anderson concluded, At present, the court does not find sufficient evidence to alter custody. Mr. John, if you wish to appeal, you need to present more conclusive proof. Court is adjourned. Rose smiled triumphantly, gathering her papers, shooting John a victorious look. Scene: the courthouse hallway. Moments later. In the courthouse hallway, John intercepted them, calling softly, Stella. The girl froze, her hands gripping the straps of her bag tightly, her shoulders trembling. Rose stepped between them, her voice sweet. You're scaring her. John clenched his fists. She's not scared of me. She's scared of you, Rose smirked. You lost, John. The court is on my side. Society is on my side. Mr. Edward, standing nearby, shook his head sadly at John. I'm sorry for you, but in this society, papers and pretty pictures carry weight. The truth? That's another story. Rose led Stella away without looking back. John stood frozen in the cold hallway, still gripping the useless file, his heart heavy as stone. Afghanistan had been easier then. This moment, watching his daughter walk silently into an invisible prison while no one believed him and no one saved her. Scene: the apartment building. Later that evening. The taxi stopped in front of the old apartment building, the yellow streetlight casting dim glows on the dark windows. Rose tightened her grip on Stella's hand, forcing her into the elevator, her eyes darting around as if afraid someone might follow. But no one did. John had been utterly defeated in court. Back in the 5th-floor apartment, Rose threw her purse onto the couch and slammed the door shut. She turned to Stella, her voice sharp. Go to the music room now. Stella hesitated. Mommy, I'm tired, Rose sneered. Tired? You embarrassed me in court, and now you dare to be tired? The girl trembled as she walked into the room, her eyes empty. The door closed with a sharp click, the sound of the lock turning. Rose calmly taped a new sheet of music to the wall. This piece is for the National Conservatory audition. I don't care if you know it or not. If you play it wrong, no food for you. Stella clenched her small fists, her throat tightening, her eyes burning. She looked at the piano in front of her. Each key was no longer an instrument but a weapon. Oath torture. Her tiny hands trembled as they touched the keys, the melody breaking apart. Full of mistakes, Rose's cold voice rang from a mini camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. You play this poorly and expect to compete? Do you want to be like your grandma? Die useless? Stella burst into tears, tears rolling down her cheeks. The broken, off-key notes sounded like lashes striking her spirit. Scene, 4 nights later. The music room, desperation. On the 4th night, Stella couldn't take it anymore. Her hands were swollen red, her fingertips bleeding. In desperation, she slammed her hands onto the keys, the discordant noise echoing through the room. I can't. Rose immediately burst into the room, her eyes blazing. What do you think you're doing? Stella recoiled in fear, her tearful eyes wide. I'm sorry, it hurts too much. Rose grabbed the girl's thin arm, squeezing tightly. You have to be good. I spent money, effort, my youth on you. You owe me. You will repay me. Stella sobbed, her voice cracking. I just want to rest for a while. Rose shoved her hard. Stella fell to the floor, her head hitting the piano stand painfully. From now on, no dinner. You eat only when you memorize this piece. Rose slammed the door shut, locking it, leaving Stella curled on the floor, her stomach growling, her hands trembling. Scene. The next day, outside the apartment. The next day, John kept calling, sending messages, but no one answered. He stood quietly below the apartment window, staring up. The light in the music room flickered, faint with broken, halting notes drifting down. A middle-aged woman named Irene, his upstairs neighbor from Los Angeles with graying hair, approached, sighing. John, I hear piano all day. The child is too young for such nonstop practice. John clenched his fists, his voice strained. I took it to court, but no one believed me. Irene shook her head. I've heard her crying at night so many times, but Rose knows a lot of people. Everyone thinks she's the perfect mother. The piano sounds above faltered, then stopped. John looked up, his heart racing. Quietly, he climbed the stairs. Standing outside the apartment door, pressing his ear against it, he strained to listen. A minute, 2, then tired footsteps approached. The door opened, and Rose stepped out, her face expressionless. John blocked her path. Where's my daughter? How is she? Rose gave a cold, dismissive smile. You have no right to ask. She brushed past him, leaving the apartment building without another glance. John immediately pushed the door open. The music room was dark. Stella sat curled up on the floor, clutching her stomach, her face pale. Sweetheart, Stella. John rushed over, scooping her into his arms. Her small lips were dry and cracked, her eyes half closed, her breathing faint. He carried Stella to the elevator. Irene ran after them, her face full of worry. Let me come with you. We need to get her to the hospital right now. Scene. The hospital, emergency room. Again, in the emergency room. Dr. Wallace frowned as he reviewed the test results. This child is severely malnourished, hypoglycemic, with early signs of infection in her fingertips. How could anyone push a child to practice this much? And this isn't the first time she's been admitted this month. John clenched his fists, his eyes red. I'm trying to fight for custody, but the law is on her side. Wallace sighed heavily. It's sad. Society often only sees what's on the surface, but you have to do something. If not, this child will be completely destroyed. Stella lay on the hospital bed, her face ghostly pale, her eyelids barely open, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks. John sat beside her, holding her tiny hand, whispering, I won't let you suffer like this anymore, I promise. Out in the hallway, Irene spoke quietly. I'll testify if needed, but you need stronger evidence, something undeniable. John nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Scene, that night, outside the apartment. That night, he stood once more under the apartment window, looking up at the flickering light from the music room. The piano played, broken and off-key, then stopped. In the heavy silence, John broke down and cried. The battlefield had taken his comrades, but never had he felt as defeated as he did now. Watching his own daughter's dreams, dignity, and spirit being strangled day by day in silence. Scene. 4 days later, heightened control. 4 days had passed since he had last carried Stella to the hospital. Since then, Rose had tightened her control even more. She installed extra mini cameras in the music room, locked the door from the outside, and kept Stella from any contact with the outside world. Irene, the neighbor upstairs, secretly fed John information every day. She hasn't been allowed out. I hear the piano all day. Wrong notes, then silence. I'm scared, John. John nodded, his voice strained. I know, but I still don't have strong enough evidence. Irene looked at him, her eyes heavy with worry. Evidence? You need to hurry, or that child won't. That night, under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights, John stood under the apartment window, gazing up. The piano played again, wrong notes, broken rhythms, each sound cutting into his heart. Then silence, no more music. No more crying. Only the thick darkness swallowing everything. John clenched his fists, his chest tightening. Afghanistan, with its bombs and corpses, felt easier than this, watching his own daughter's spirit being crushed day after day while he stood powerless. Scene. The next morning. Following Rose and Stella. The next morning, Rose left home early with Stella. The girl looked frail, her eyes ringed with dark circles, her steps unsteady. John followed from a distance, his heart aching as if squeezed in a vice. He tailed them on his motorcycle through 3 red light stops until they arrived at a strange building on Broadway Street, a private training center for young piano prodigies. John stopped his bike, parking it by the curb, and quietly hid behind a streetlight pole. Watching through the glass windows. Inside, Stella sat at a glossy black Steinway, stiff as a corpse in a coffin. In front of her, an elderly man with silver hair and glasses held a ruler, pointing sharply at the sheet music. Rose sat in the corner, arms crossed, nodding slightly like a merchant inspecting valuable goods. John pulled out his phone. Quietly. Recording video. Stella's hands trembled as she played, and every time she made a mistake, the man slammed the ruler on the keys, making her flinch. No one needed words to understand. This was no longer music. This was torture. John bit his lip, turning away, clutching the phone tightly in his jacket pocket. A spark of hope flickered. This video might be new evidence, but then doubt gnawed at him. Would it be enough? Scene. Later that day, a deceptive facade. Just hours after Stella returned home, Rose posted a photo of her sitting at the piano with the caption, "My little angel," practicing tirelessly for her dream of entering the National Conservatory. "Mommy is so proud of you." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments praising them. Amazing. Such a great mom. She's as talented as her mother. John stood frozen. A spiritual prison hidden behind hashtags and brightly filtered photos. Scene. That evening. A desperate plan. That evening, when Rose left to attend a charity art fundraiser, John seized the chance to return to the apartment using his old set of keys. But the new electronic lock kept him out. Edward, the elderly neighbor downstairs, secretly opened the door for him through a shared balcony connected to the next apartment. "Only 5 minutes," Edward whispered, nervously checking his watch. "If she comes back." "I know." John nodded, his eyes already wet. He stepped into the music room. Stella sat there, her head bowed, her wrists bandaged. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, mixed with the faint scent of burnt wood and paper. The remnants of the night Rose burned Elena's handwritten music sheets. "Sweetheart." John knelt down, his voice breaking. Stella slowly lifted her head, her eyes empty, though for just a moment, a faint spark lit up when she saw her father. "Daddy, it hurts, but I can't tell," Mommy said. John hugged her, no longer holding back his tears. "I don't care about competitions. I just want you to be happy. I just want you to smile." Stella bit her lip, then whispered something that shattered him. "Daddy, if I die, will Mommy forgive me?" John froze, his heart stopping. He hugged her tighter than ever, whispering desperately, "No, you can't die. Never even think that." Outside, in the hallway, high-heeled footsteps echoed. Rose was back. Edward whispered frantically, "Go now." John quickly pressed a tiny recording device into Stella's hand, kissing her forehead. "Record everything, even just one sentence." The door burst open. Rose stood there, her eyes like a venomous snake. Edward distracted her while John slipped out through the balcony, sliding down the fire escape like a shadow. Rose suspected nothing. Seen. That night at Turning Point. That night, for the first time, Stella lied. "Mommy, I played the piece wrong today." Rose snapped, her voice venomous. "You stupid girl, Stella, I gave up everything for you. If it weren't for appearances, I would have dumped you in an orphanage." The girl stayed silent. In her dress pocket, the tiny recorder blinked red. Scene. The next morning. Hope emerges. The next morning, John met Irene and Edward. He played the recording. Rose's voice was clear. "You exist only so I can show you off to the world." Irene gasped. Edward went still, his fingers trembling as they touched his glasses. "Send it to me. I'll testify. And I know some people at the court." John nodded. For the first time, a ray of hope pierced through the walls closing in around him. Scene. The National Conservatory Audition Hall. The next morning, Rose dragged Stella out of the house, taking her to the National Conservatory's audition hall. John was already waiting at the gate, his eyes darkened with exhaustion from sleepless nights. In his hands was the newest appeal file containing the damning recording of Rose's abuse and Stella's tearful sobs. Edward stood beside him, gripping the signed affidavit tightly. "I'll testify. I won't let that child be destroyed any longer." Rose approached, her eyes icy. "What are you doing here? Playing the good father again?" John looked at her, his voice like steel. "I'm here to save my daughter." Stella clung to Rose's side, her frightened eyes darting toward John, her lips pressed tightly together. "Sweetheart," John called softly. Rose smirked, pulling Stella along. "She's about to perform. Get out of the way." John moved to hold Stella back, but the pleading, fearful look in her eyes stopped him. He knew he couldn't force her today, but he would not give up. Scene. The audition hall. Tension mounting. The audition began. Stella sat before the grand piano in the center of the hall, her eyes weary, her hands trembling. The judges flipped the sheet music and gave the signal. "Begin." The music started, distorted and offbeat from the very first notes. Stella tried, but her aching hands and scattered mind wouldn't let her focus. Rose sat in the audience, her eyes blazing with anger, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hand clenched into a fist. "Useless," she muttered through gritted teeth. The discordant notes echoed through the hall, and the audience began to murmur. Some judges frowned, others shook their heads in disappointment. Stella lifted her head and caught sight of John, sitting in the back row. He said nothing, only clenched his fists, his reddened eyes fixed on her. The girl lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. She remembered her grandmother, the days when she was taught to play in that small room, no pressure, no ruler, only music and love. The piano fell silent. In the stillness of the hall, Stella stood abruptly, her arms hanging at her sides, her eyes red and wet. I can't. I don't want to." Rose shot to her feet, storming toward her. You've humiliated me. Stella trembled, stepping back, her voice breaking. I just want to play for Grandma, not for a competition. The hall filled with murmurs. Chief Judge Teresa Morgan, a renowned pianist, frowned. What is going on? This is a professional stage. John strode forward, holding up a thick folder, his voice firm. Forgive the interruption, but the truth needs to be heard. Rose lunged forward to stop him, but John raised his hand. I have evidence. My daughter has been emotionally abused, forced to practice like a machine. Here are audio recordings, testimony from Mr. David, and medical records. David stepped forward, his deep voice steady. I'm Stella's teacher. I've seen physical and psychological injuries on her. I'm ready to testify. Judge Teresa looked at Stella. Do you truly want to compete, child? Stella shook her head, tears spilling from her red-rimmed eyes. I just want to play Grandma's song, not for a contest, just to remember her. The hall fell silent. Rose's face twisted with rage. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. John looked at Rose, his voice sharp as steel. You're the one who doesn't know anything about feelings, about music, about love. Security officers stepped in as the tension rose, holding Rose back to check the documents. John wrapped his arms around Stella, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, I came too late. But from now on, I won't let anyone hurt you again. Stella broke into sobs in her father's arms, feeling real warmth for the first time in months. The hall erupted into scattered but heartfelt applause. That unfinished piece of music played that day became the signal for the end of the darkest chapter of Stella's life. Scene: 3 days later, the fifth-floor apartment. Only 3 days after the chaotic audition at Juilliard School, the atmosphere in the fifth-floor apartment had completely changed. Rose was being held for investigation on charges of systematic emotional abuse of a minor. News of the case spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Whispers and gossip followed the woman who had once been praised as a perfect mother. John lead Stella back into the apartment, holding her small hand tightly, his heart conflicted but filled with determination. Irene, the neighbor from upstairs, hurried over, worry on her face. John, I heard the police came for Rose this morning. John nodded, his voice low. She's being held. The court will hold an emergency retrial. Irene sighed in relief. I'm happy for Stella. But how is she? John looked at his daughter, still silent, her eyes red, her posture withdrawn like a little bird that had been trapped in a cage for too long. She needs time, he said softly. Scene: that night, the apartment, a glimmer of hope. That night, the once cold apartment felt warmer when Stella sat by her late grandmother's old piano. Her hands trembled as they hovered over the keys, her weary eyes glancing around as if afraid of being scolded. John sat beside her, his voice gentle. No one will ever force you again. You can play any time and play whatever song you want. Stella froze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daddy, if I play wrong, will you be mad at me? John shook his head, his throat tight. I'd only be mad at myself for letting you suffer this long. Stella bit her lip, then slowly pressed the first keys. The notes rang out offbeat, clumsy but no longer fearful. It was her grandmother's unfinished song, the one Rose had always cut short. Each note rose, hesitant, but warm. John sat motionless, his heart swelling until tears blurred his vision. That night, Stella fell asleep on the sofa, a faint smile on her lips. John tucked her in, his eyes full of love. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in months, hope glimmered. Scene: a month later, New York Supreme Court. Month later at the New York Supreme Court, a criminal trial began against Rose Foster for systematic emotional abuse of a minor, destruction of dignity, and falsification of educational achievements. Public outrage was immense. Every piece of evidence was displayed openly. From the audio of Stella sobbing to videos of Rose screaming and striking her daughter backstage, leaving no room for doubt, the prosecution demanded the highest sentence. Within the legal framework, 5 years probation, permanent termination of parental rights, and the forfeiture of all scholarships and awards fraudulently obtained under Stella's name, but the judge delivered an even harsher verdict. The defendant destroyed a child's childhood under the guise of being a perfect mother. This is a prolonged, insidious form of abuse, no different from psychological torture. The court sentenced Rose Foster to 15 years in prison, permanent. Loss of parental rights, inclusion in the National Education System's special watch list, and revocation of all credentials related to child education. Applause thundered through the courtroom like a storm. When Rose was escorted to the prison van, a crowd waited outside, throwing the old practice schedules once taped to Stella's wall at her, scribbled with words in bold. A daughter is not a project. She's a person. Rose looked up, her eyes hollow. The pride she once carried was torn apart, leaving only a lonely woman cursed by the very society that once praised her. The prison van's door slammed shut. This time, every door closed forever on the woman who had used love to create hell. Scene. Days later, the 5th-floor apartment. A new beginning. In the days that followed, John brought Stella back to the 5th-floor apartment, now free of Rose's presence, free of shouting, free of harsh practice schedules plastered across the walls. Irene visited, bringing a basket of pastries and a small bouquet. "Welcome home, Stella." The girl shrank back. Hiding behind her father, John gently encouraged her. "It's okay, sweetheart. This is Irene. She's always cared about you." Irene knelt down, her voice soft. "I can play piano a little too. If you want, we can practice together. Not for competitions, just for fun." Stella's eyes widened, hesitant. "I won't get scolded?" John smiled sadly. "No one will ever scold you again. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to play for joy." That night, music filled the apartment for the first time without being interrupted, without angry shouting. Stella played her grandmother's unfinished song, each note slow, uneven, but full of emotion. John sat by the window, his eyes red. He knew the road ahead was still long, but the first step had been taken firmly. Scene. The next day, a new request. Next day, John officially submitted a request to Juilliard School, asking for Stella to participate in a memorial concert, not as a national contestant, but as a young artist honoring her late grandmother. In the request, he wrote, "My daughter doesn't need to prove her talent with achievements or awards. She only needs the freedom to play her grandmother's song in front of family, friends, and those who love music." The organizers responded quickly, "We are honored to welcome Stella Carter to the memorial concert for those we love. We look forward to seeing your family at Times Square." John gripped the letter tightly, relief flooding his chest. He looked up at Stella. She was practicing diligently, her face brighter than ever. Scene. Times Square, the memorial concert evening. That evening at Times Square, the Central Plaza glowed with golden lights. The Children's Conservatory was beautifully decorated, and a long line of people eagerly waited to attend the special memorial concert, a symphony for loved ones. John held Stella's hand, his heart pounding. For the first time after all those dark months, he saw his daughter walking confidently among the crowd, not hiding in corners, not shrinking away. Stella wore a pure white dress, her hair braided, her bright eyes looking around curiously. "Daddy, there are so many people," she whispered. John gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're not competing. You're just playing Grandma's song for her and for yourself." Stella nodded, her lips pressed together in determination. They stepped into the grand hall. The stage lights sparkled against the high ceiling, and the orchestra was ready. Hundreds of people sat neatly in their seats, and above the judges' podium hung a large banner, in memory of those who sacrificed for family. Teresa Morgan, The famous pianist who had witnessed the incident at the conservatory approached with a kind smile. "Stella, are you ready?" Stella hesitated. "I'm a little nervous." Teresa patted her head gently. "You don't need to be perfect. Music is for feeling, not for being forced." John murmured a soft, "Thank you," his eyes glistening. In the audience, familiar faces appeared. Irene waved warmly. David, Stella's teacher, gave her a thumbs up. Even Edward, the frail old man, had come, his eyes kind. "I wouldn't miss this night, John." John smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. Scene. The concert begins, moments. Later, the program's host stepped onto the stage, his voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's concert is not only to honor music, but also to remember those who inspired, nurtured, and sacrificed for their families and children." He paused, turning toward Stella. "And now, please welcome to the stage the young artist Stella Carter, who will perform a special piece titled Grandma's Song, an unfinished composition by her late grandmother, completed through love." Applause thundered through the hall. John clenched his hands, his heart racing. Stella stepped onto the stage, her small figure illuminated by the lights. She sat at the piano, placing her hands gently on the keys, her eyes scanning the large audience. Catching sight of her father in the front row, Stella whispered softly, "Daddy, this is the first time you'll hear it live." John nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks, his chest tightening with emotion. The piano sang, soft, slow. Each note floated gently into the air. The hall grew silent as if everyone held their breath. Her grandmother's unfinished composition was finally played in full, no interruptions. No shouting, no tears or punishments. Only warm, soaring melodies filled with love. Each note told a story about a grandmother who had passed away, about a little girl whose childhood had been suffocated, now free, now loved. The audience sat in silence, many with tears glistening in their eyes. Stella's fingers danced across the keys, those small fingers once bruised and bleeding, now stronger than ever. When the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause long. Thunderous clapping, with some people standing and cheering. "Amazing!" Stella stood, bowing deeply, her eyes shining brightly. For the first time in her life, she smiled radiantly without fear. John rushed onto the stage, hugging his daughter tightly, tears streaming. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." Stella hugged him back, whispering softly, "Daddy, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm free now." Scene. Outside the hall, roses. Downfall. Far away, Rose stood outside the hall, surrounded by the scornful stares of the crowd. The media whispered, "That's the abusive mother who tortured her own child." Rose lowered her head and quietly left, her steps heavy. She had lost everything: her reputation, respect, custody of her daughter, and the false image she had carefully built. Scene. That night. The fifth-floor apartment. A new chapter. That night. In the fifth-floor apartment, John and Stella sat by the window, watching the city lights glow. The sound of piano music filled the living room, gentle, free, no longer a burden. But the language of love. Irene came in with pastries, smiling kindly. "Tonight, this apartment has the most beautiful music in the whole building." David stopped by, handing Stella a new music book. "Play whenever you like. No one will ever force you again." Edward leaned on his cane, nodding with a satisfied smile. "You finally did what a father is supposed to do." John smiled, eyes red, pulling Stella close. "I'll never let you be alone again." Stella looked up at her father, beaming. "And I'll never let Grandma's song be cut short again." Outside, New York City sparkled with bright lights, echoing with music and laughter, a perfect ending to a long journey of love, struggle, and faith in justice. That song was finally played to the very end. Epilogue. A lesson learned. The lesson from this story reminds us that love and perseverance are the greatest powers to protect children from emotional abuse. No one has the right to take away a child's childhood, dreams, or feelings for the sake of ambition or achievements. Even when belittled, even when fighting alone, true parents must have the courage to stand up for their children, to listen, and to understand. Music, like freedom, is only beautiful when it comes from the heart, not from force. Justice may come late, but it will always come.